Hello everyone, what's up? Welcome to the GMB channel. Hope you will enjoy our video. Before we begin, hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Here is the news title. Nigel Farage just landed one major blow against Tories who need new stick to beat Reform. It's back to the drawing board for the Conservatives and Labour Party as the Reform UK surge refuses to let up. In a major step towards political maturity, Reform UK is no longer a private company controlled by leader Nigel Farage and Deputy Leader Richard Tice have, as promised, relinquished over 90% of shares in Reform UK Party Limited. The Patriotic Party will now become a non-profit organisation, without shareholders. From this moment on, Reform will be controlled by Reform 2025 Limited, and over 200,000 members, with party chairman Zia Yusuf declaring, as promised, Nigel Farage has handed over ownership of Reform UK to its members. As opinion polls show Reform becoming the first or second most popular political party in Britain, the drive to professionalise took on a new sense of urgency. A party which champions democracy and freedom of speech needed to demonstrate it lived by these principles. The move, led by Yusuf, was also important in removing a stick with which Reform's enemies could beat the party and Farage. With party membership overtaking that of the beleaguered Conservatives, it was also mission-critical that Reform handed more say on party management to its burgeoning membership base. Now the focus will be on what remains of local elections alongside keeping up momentum, raising funds, growing the membership, and preparing for the next general election, slated for 2029. The democratization drive was a key step in preparing Reform UK for all this and the possibility of government. The Tories, in particular, will have to find another line of attack as they succumb to fatigue and failure against Farage's rising star. I am a legal expert. This is why Baroness Carr was wrong to criticize Kemi Badenoch. Baroness Carr said she was troubled by Kemi Badenoch discussing a ruling with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This week, during her annual press conference, the Lady Chief Justice of England and Wales, Baroness Carr, made several surprising and constitutionally questionable criticisms of the Prime Minister and of the Leader of the Opposition. She told reporters that she was deeply troubled by the fact that both had expressed public disagreement with a judgment of the upper tribunal, allowing a family in Gaza, who had a relative living in the UK, to enter the country on the ground that denying them entry breached their right of respect for family and private life under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Baroness Carr said that this parliamentary criticism of the judgment was unacceptable and amounted to a failure to respect and protect the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. She said that if they, judges, get it wrong, the protection is a challenge on appeal. If the legislation is wrong, it is Parliament's prerogative to legislate. The Lady Chief Justice went on to say that where parties, including the government, disagree with a court's findings, they should do so through the appellate process. There is a fundamental misconception at the root of these remarks, which betrays a view of the Constitution that is incompatible with the core constitutional principle of parliamentary sovereignty. It has never been part of our constitutional practice that the government must exhaust its rights of appeal before responding to a decision of the courts by inviting Parliament to legislate to change the law, or to restore what the law was previously thought to be. Nor is it a requirement that any legislative response must proceed on the premise that the court's decision was correct, even though the decision must, until the legislation is passed, be accepted as binding. Ministers and other parliamentarians need to be able to criticize the law in order to justify modifying it, and when that law is encapsulated in judgments of the courts, that is bound to involve criticizing judicial decisions. It is invariably part of the rationale for legislation of every sort that the courts would decide the matter differently if left to themselves. Even more troubling is the implication that where parliamentarians disapprove of the outcome of a case, in the courts, it must be because the legislation is wrong. In Alice Through the Looking Glass, Humpty Dumpty told Alice, "When I use a word, it means exactly what I choose it to mean." There is something of this in Baroness Carr's assumption that the law is whatever the judiciary say it is, that they are infallible except insofar as their decisions may be subject to appeal. If the appellate process produces the wrong result, it can only be, she implies, because the legislation is wrong. However, what parliamentary sovereignty means is instead that the law is what Parliament says it is. If the courts fail to construe the law to give effect to Parliament's intentions, that is the court's failure. Defective drafting or some other lack of clarity may render it a forgivable failure, sometimes even an unavoidable one. But a failure by the courts, it remains. Legislation can be unclear or misunderstood, or it may need to be amended because it is no longer compatible with government policy. But those things would not make it wrong. Judges, on the other hand, can be wrong about what Parliament intended, and they are more likely to be. So if they allow themselves the delusion that they cannot be wrong about what legislation means, judges, even those at the highest level, are human and therefore fallible. And there is no rule of law or constitutional principle that says that, if the courts fail correctly to understand Parliament's legislative intentions, it must always be Parliament's fault. In the Gaza case, the matter is further complicated by the fact that, for critics of the judgment, it is not the legislation that is at fault. There was no legal loophole in the immigration rules of which the applicants took advantage, unless, which would be unfortunate, it was the existence, for use in exceptional circumstances, of a residual discretion to grant leave to enter, outside the normal rules. What is wrong with the judgment is how the court chose to second-guess the exercise of the Home Secretary's residual discretion, as if the existence of the backstop was the equivalent of saying that there are no rules at all, except the merits of each individual case. The denial of leave to enter in the case in question was at least partly because allowing an exception in that case risked creating a whole new class of cases that would need to be treated in the same way, and so would have a legislative Nigel Farage just landed. One major blow against Tories, who need a new stick to beat. Reform, the political landscape of the United Kingdom, has been undergoing seismic shifts, and at the heart of this transformation is Nigel Farage's relentless push to solidify Reform UK as a formidable political force. The latest move, relinquishing control of the party and turning it into a non-profit organization, marks a pivotal moment in British politics. As Reform UK sheds its status as a private entity and evolves into a true membership-led party, the Conservatives and Labour find themselves scrambling for new ways to counter its meteoric rise. A new chapter for reform. UK reform. UK's transition from a private company controlled by Farage and Deputy Leader Richard Tice into a non-profit organisation. Under the stewardship of Reform 2025, LTD is not just an administrative change, it is a statement of intent. With over 200,000 members now having a say in the party's direction, Reform UK is sending a clear message. It is here to stay, and it is ready to challenge the political duopoly of the UK. Party chairman Zia Yusuf declared, as promised, Nigel Farage has handed over ownership of Reform UK to its members. This symbolic shift enhances the party's credibility, positioning it as a grassroots-driven movement that stands for democracy, freedom of speech, and national sovereignty. These values resonate deeply with a growing number of disillusioned voters, particularly those who have turned their backs on the Conservatives. The Conservative Party's dilemma. The Tory party has long dismissed Reform UK as an insurgent force, led by Farage's personality, rather than a sustainable political entity. By formally democratizing the party, Reform has stripped the Conservatives of one of their primary attack lines, that it was merely a vehicle for Farage's ambitions. Now the Tories must confront the reality that Reform UK is a structured, organized, and increasingly popular alternative to their own struggling party. For years, the Conservatives have relied on a dwindling base of traditional right-leaning voters who prioritized Brexit, national identity, and economic sovereignty. However, the party's perceived failures on immigration, tax policies, and cost-of-living crises have left many feeling abandoned. Reform UK's rise is a direct result of this disenchantment, and Farage's latest move ensures that the party cannot be dismissed as a mere flash in the pan. Labour's changing calculus. While Reform UK has largely been seen as a threat to the Tories, its surging popularity is also causing ripples within Labour. Traditionally, working-class voters in former Labour strongholds, commonly referred to as the Red Wall, defected to the Conservatives in 2019, lured by Boris Johnson's promise to get Brexit done. However, many of these voters remain skeptical of Labour's ability to represent their interests, and Reform UK is now positioning itself as a viable alternative. Labour leader Keir Starmer faces a conundrum. Should he attack Reform UK head-on, risking alienating right-leaning swing voters, or should he ignore the party and hope it primarily damages the Conservatives? This strategic dilemma will play out in the coming years as Reform UK cements its place in the political mainstream. The numbers tell the story. Opinion polls increasingly place Reform UK as either the first or second most popular political party in Britain. This remarkable ascent is not just theoretical. It is backed by real-world shifts in voter allegiances. Membership figures tell a similar story, with Reform UK reportedly surpassing the Conservative Party's membership base. This grassroots enthusiasm contrasts starkly with the malaise within the Tory ranks, where disillusionment and leadership struggles continue to erode confidence. With local elections on the horizon and a general election expected in 2029, Reform UK is focused on converting this momentum into electoral success. Raising funds, expanding membership, and building a robust campaign infrastructure will be critical to its continued growth. The road ahead. Can Reform UK sustain its momentum? The transformation of Reform UK into a member-controlled entity is a significant step, but challenges remain. The party must prove that it can operate effectively beyond Farage's leadership and maintain internal cohesion as it expands. Additionally, electoral success requires more than just popular support. It demands a strategic approach to winning seats under the UK's first-past-the-post system. The Tories, for their part, must find a new way to counter Reform UK's appeal. If they continue to ignore the concerns that have driven voters into Farage's camp, such as immigration, cost of living, and national sovereignty, they risk further decline. The Labour Party, too, must be wary of assuming that Reform UK's rise will solely damage the Baroness Carr regarding criticism of judicial decisions have sparked considerable debate about the proper relationship between the judiciary, the executive, and Parliament. Her assertion that parliamentary criticism of court rulings undermines the rule of law reflects a constitutional interpretation that, in my view as a legal expert, is flawed. The core constitutional principle at stake here is parliamentary sovereignty, and it is essential to clarify why her position is not only incorrect, but also potentially harmful to the democratic process. The role of Parliament in shaping law. The heart of the British Constitution is the principle that Parliament is the supreme lawmaking body. Judges interpret and apply the law, but they do not create it. When judicial decisions appear to contradict or extend the intention of Parliament, it is entirely appropriate for government ministers and other elected representatives to express their views and, where necessary, seek legislative remedies. To suggest that the government must wait until all appeals have been exhausted before addressing a judicial ruling misunderstands the function of both Parliament and the courts. Historically, Parliament has often responded swiftly to court decisions that it deems incorrect or inconsistent with legislative intent. Examples abound of Parliament enacting corrective legislation, following court rulings that were considered to have misinterpreted the law. The idea that ministers must remain silent on such matters until the appellate process is complete is not only impractical, but also constitutionally unfounded. Judicial fallibility and parliamentary oversight. The judiciary is not infallible. Judges, like all humans, can and do make mistakes. There have been numerous instances where higher courts have overturned lower court rulings, demonstrating the fallibility of judicial reasoning. Furthermore, judges can misunderstand or misapply legislative intent. When this happens, Parliament has both the right and the duty to step in and clarify the law. Baroness Carr's view appears to suggest that judges always correctly interpret the law, and that any disagreement with a judicial decision must be due to deficiencies in legislation. This stance is fundamentally at odds with the reality of legal interpretation. The principle of parliamentary sovereignty dictates that it is ultimately Parliament, not the judiciary, that has the final say on what the law should be. If a court ruling is deemed to have misapplied or extended the law in a manner inconsistent with parliamentary intent, it is not only appropriate but necessary for Parliament to address the issue. The Gaza case and ministerial discretion. The recent ruling that permitted a family in Gaza to enter the UK, under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, raises significant concerns about judicial overreach. The court's decision effectively substituted its own judgment for that of the Home Secretary, who had exercised her discretion under the immigration rules. The purpose of residual discretion in immigration cases is to allow for exceptional circumstances to be considered, not to create a broad and undefined avenue for admission that undermines established immigration policy. One of the reasons the Home Secretary denied leave to enter in this case was the potential for setting a precedent that would necessitate similar treatment for many other applicants. If a single case establishes a new category of eligibility for entry, then the court's decision has effectively altered immigration policy, a power that rightly belongs to Parliament, not the judiciary. The danger of judicial overreach. Judicial overreach occurs when courts extend their role beyond interpretation and effectively legislate from the bench. This is particularly problematic in areas such as immigration policy, which involve complex considerations of national security, economic impact, and social cohesion. These are matters for elected representatives, who are accountable to the public, rather than for judges, who are not. By suggesting that parliamentary criticism of judicial decisions undermines the rule of law, Baroness Carr is advocating a position that could lead to a form of judicial supremacy inconsistent with our constitutional framework. The rule of law does not mean that judicial decisions are beyond criticism. Rather, it means that legal rules are applied consistently and fairly. Part of that fairness involves ensuring that Parliament retains its role as the ultimate lawmaking body. So what do you guys think about this update? Let me know in the comment below. If you like my video, please press like button and subscribe for more. Hope I'll see you in next video.